My name is Mason Reed, I'm 34, and I work as a financial advisor in Boston. When my mother texted about an important family meeting this weekend, I felt a knot form in my stomach. My brother Trevor has always been financially irresponsible, and 6 months ago, my grandfather left me a substantial inheritance. I've noticed my family acting strangely lately. Hushed phone calls, awkward questions about my finances, Trevor suddenly being nice to me. Something wasn't adding up. Before I tell you what happened at that meeting, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if family drama over money feels all too familiar in your life. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in suburban Connecticut. My father, Richard, worked long hours as an investment banker at a mid-sized firm in Hartford. Despite his financial expertise, we always seemed to be stretching our budget. Our house was slightly beyond what we could comfortably afford, and there were constant arguments about money behind closed doors. My mother, Diane, was a former elementary school teacher who quit working when Trevor was born. From early on, it was clear that Trevor was her favorite. She'd rush to his defense whenever he broke something or failed a test, always ready with an excuse. "He's just spirited," she'd say, or, "the teacher doesn't understand his learning style." When I brought home straight A's, it was expected. When Trevor managed a C+, it was celebration worthy. The contrast between us was stark even as children. While Trevor demanded the newest video games and threw tantrums until he got them, I saved my allowance for weeks to buy books. I remember once when I was 9, watching my father's face tighten as he reluctantly handed over his credit card for Trevor's third expensive toy that month. Later that night, I heard them arguing about budget concerns. My grandfather, Franklin Reed, lived about 20 minutes away in a modest ranch-style home. I started visiting him every Saturday when I was 10. Initially because my parents suggested it would give them time with Trevor. Those visits quickly became the highlight of my week. Grandpa Franklin had been an accountant for over 40 years before retiring. He lived simply but comfortably, having invested wisely throughout his life. During our visits, he'd let me help balance his checkbook or review his investment statements. "Money is just a tool, Mason," he'd tell me. "Not something to worship or waste, but to respect." While my father chased status symbols and my mother enabled Trevor's spending, Grandpa taught me about compound interest and living below my means. When I turned 12, he helped me open my first savings account with $50 I'd earned from mowing lawns. Every month, we'd review my balance together, calculating interest and discussing my financial goals. I could see the disappointment in my grandfather's eyes whenever my father would complain about missing investment opportunities or being cash poor, despite his six-figure salary. They had a strained relationship, with my father always trying to prove himself and my grandfather quietly disapproving of his choices. Our special bond deepened over chess games and financial discussions. While other kids my age were focused solely on sports or video games, I was learning the rule of 72 and the difference between stocks and bonds. Grandpa recognized my natural aptitude for financial planning and encouraged it, giving me books about investing and economics that I devoured. Meanwhile, Trevor and I continued growing in opposite directions. In high school, he joined the lacrosse team, requiring expensive equipment that strained our family budget. He crashed 2 cars before turning 18, with my parents covering the costs both times. I worked part-time at the local library and saved most of what I earned. College only widened the gap between us. Trevor attended an expensive private university, changing majors 3 times and taking 5.5 years to graduate with a communications degree. His grades were mediocre at best, but my parents funded everything: tuition, apartment, spending money, spring break trips. When he graduated with a 2.4 GPA, they threw him an extravagant party. I earned scholarships to a state university, worked 20 hours a week throughout college, and graduated with honors in finance with minimal student loans. My graduation dinner was at a casual restaurant, with my grandfather as the only family member who seemed genuinely proud. After college, I secured a position at a small financial advisory firm in Boston. I lived with roommates, packed lunches, and invested 20% of each paycheck. Nights and weekends. I studied for advanced certifications and a master's degree. My career progressed steadily: junior advisor, associate, and eventually senior financial advisor with my own client portfolio. Trevor, meanwhile, bounced between jobs his first few years after college. He'd start something, complain about the work environment or his boss, then quit or get fired. My parents always had a safety net ready. They helped with his rent when he was between jobs and never asked to be repaid. His first major financial disaster came 5 years ago. He convinced my parents to invest $120,000 in a restaurant he wanted to open with a friend who had lots of industry experience. The friend had actually been a bartender for 8 months. The restaurant closed within a year, with suppliers and employees still owed money. 2 years later, he persuaded them to put $80,000 into his friend's revolutionary tech startup. The friend had no technical background, just an idea for an app that already existed in multiple forms. That money disappeared even faster. Throughout his 20s, Trevor lived well beyond his means. He leased luxury cars he couldn't afford, lived in upscale apartments, and took lavish vacations on credit. What I didn't know until later was that he had also developed a gambling problem, starting with sports betting and escalating to regular casino trips. By the time he was 29, Trevor had amassed nearly $200,000 in credit card debt across multiple cards, most of which my parents didn't know about. He'd mastered the art of balance transfers and minimum payments, staying just ahead of complete financial collapse. 3 years ago, Grandpa Franklin's health began declining. He was diagnosed with congestive heart failure, and his doctor recommended hospice care. I visited him 3 to 4 times a week, often spending full days by his side. We continued our financial discussions, but also talked about life, regrets, and what truly matters. Trevor visited maybe 5 times total during those 8 months. He always had an excuse. Work was busy, his car was in the shop, he wasn't feeling well. When he did visit, he'd stay for 20 minutes, visibly uncomfortable and checking his phone constantly. When Grandpa passed away, I was devastated. He had been more than a grandfather to me. He was a mentor, friend, and the parent figure who truly understood me. At the reading of the will, everyone was shocked to learn that he had accumulated $2.8 million through careful investing and simple living. Even more shocking to my family was that he left almost all of it to me. To my grandson Mason, the will stated, who understood the true value of money and will steward these resources wisely. I leave the bulk of my estate, totaling approximately $2.8 million in various investments and assets. Trevor received $50,000 with the specific instruction that it be used for education in financial management and debt reduction. My parents each received $25,000 and some family heirlooms. The reading was followed by the most uncomfortable family dinner of my life. My mother barely spoke, except to make passive-aggressive comments about surprise decisions. My father repeatedly mentioned how he had always been close with his father, despite evidence to the contrary. Trevor fluctuated between sullen silence and excessive friendliness toward me. I wasn't surprised by Grandpa's decision. We had discussed his will during his final months, and he had been explicit about his concerns regarding Trevor's and my parents' financial habits. What I didn't expect was how quickly their true colors would show in the aftermath. The initial shock of the inheritance distribution created an immediate shift in family dynamics. The awkward dinner following the will reading was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, my mother's communication with me became increasingly loaded with passive-aggressive comments. I suppose some people just get lucky in life, she'd say during our weekly phone calls. Or, your grandfather always did have his favorites, didn't he? Each statement was delivered with a thin veneer of casual conversation, but the bitterness was unmistakable. My father took a different approach. After years of minimal interest in my career, he suddenly wanted to know everything about my financial planning strategies. "Son, I've been thinking we should meet for lunch and discuss some investment ideas," he suggested. Something he had never done before. After all, managing that kind of money is a big responsibility. Most surprising was Trevor's transformation. My brother, who had alternated between ignoring me and asking for loans throughout our adult lives, became extraordinarily attentive. He began texting regularly, asking about my work and life in Boston, ending messages with, "Miss you, bro," a phrase I'd never heard from him before. Their behavior was transparent, but I didn't yet know the full extent of what they were planning. That became clearer as Trevor's financial situation continued to deteriorate. 2 months after the inheritance, Trevor lost his job at my father's friend's company. He had been late repeatedly and missed important client meetings. Rather than taking responsibility, he blamed workplace politics and an unfair manager. Within weeks, an eviction notice appeared on his luxury apartment door due to 3 months of unpaid rent. Shortly after, his BMW was repossessed from the office parking lot, causing a scene he described as totally humiliating during a tearful call to our parents. Then came the medical emergency. Trevor called my parents claiming he needed $15,000 for an urgent procedure not covered by insurance. My mother called me in panic, and I offered to contact the hospital directly to arrange payment. Suddenly, the urgency disappeared, and Trevor miraculously found another solution. By month 3 post-inheritance, Trevor had moved back into our childhood home. My parents presented this as a temporary arrangement while he got back on his feet, but I noticed they stopped mentioning any timeline for his departure after the first few weeks. With Trevor installed at home, the pressure on me intensified. My mother's calls became more frequent and emotionally charged. "I'm really worried about your brother," she'd say, her voice cracking strategically. "He's not eating, barely comes out of his room. This depression is serious, Mason." My father adopted a more direct approach, appealing to family responsibility and shared sacrifice. During one particularly transparent conversation, he mentioned, "You know, your grandfather would have wanted us to support each other as a family. This inheritance isn't just about you. There's suggestions about sharing." The inheritance started as hints but grew increasingly explicit. "Wouldn't it be nice if Trevor could have a fresh start?" my mother mused during one call. "Just a small portion of your windfall could change his life." They employed every emotional lever available. My mother dug up childhood photos, sending them with captions like, "Remember when you two were inseparable?" Despite the fact that Trevor and I had never been close. My father reminisced about all the sacrifices they had made for my education, conveniently forgetting the scholarships and jobs that had actually funded it. Most manipulative were the constant references to what Grandpa would have wanted, having spent more time with my grandfather than anyone else in his final years. I knew exactly what he would have thought about bailing out Trevor again. But contradicting their revisionist history only led to accusations that I was being selfish and cold. My suspicions about a coordinated family plan crystallized one evening when my mother accidentally called me instead of my father. Before I could speak, I overheard, "Richard, we need to get Mason to agree before Trevor's situation gets worse. The creditors are calling daily now." She quickly realized her mistake and hung up. Other red flags multiplied. During a brief visit home, I noticed Trevor sporting a new Tag Heuer watch. When I commented on it, he mumbled something about it being an old one, despite the fact that it was this year's model. A family friend mentioned a big family gathering that had happened the previous weekend, one I hadn't been invited to. When I inquired, my mother dismissed it as just an impromptu dinner. Nothing planned. Most tellingly, when I offered to help Trevor create a budget and debt repayment plan, something I do professionally for clients, my parents quickly shut down the suggestion. He doesn't need financial stress right now, my mother insisted. What he needs is support and understanding. The pattern was clear. But I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. I reached out to James, a colleague who specializes in estate law, to discuss my concerns. Over lunch, I explained the situation and my growing unease. "Mason, these are classic warning signs," James said gravely. "I've seen many families implode over inheritance issues. Have you reviewed your grandfather's will for any potential loopholes they might exploit?" That conversation prompted me to contact my grandfather's attorney, who confirmed what I suspected. My parents had called multiple times asking detailed questions about the inheritance structure, trust provisions, and access limitations. "They seem particularly interested in whether you had full control of the assets yet," the attorney told me. I didn't share any details, of course, but their interest was persistent. With mounting concern, I began gathering evidence of what was happening. During a Sunday dinner at my parents' house, I excused myself to use the bathroom and took a detour to Trevor's room. Among the clutter on his desk, I found casino receipts totaling over $30,000 from just the past month, at a time when he claimed to be broke. In my father's home office, I discovered loan application paperwork with what appeared to be my signature forged on several documents. They had never been submitted, but the preparation alone was deeply troubling. The most damning evidence came from Trevor himself. A mutual friend forwarded me a voice message where Trevor boasted, "Don't worry about the money I owe you, man. I'm coming into some serious cash soon. Family situation getting resolved. I'll be good for it plus interest." An email my mother had accidentally copied me on, and then frantically tried to recall, contained a discussion with my father about getting Mason to sign at the family meeting, and having all the paperwork ready. The final alarm bell was a notification from my bank about an unusual inquiry into my accounts. Someone had called claiming to be me, but couldn't pass the security questions. The IP address traced back to my parents' home network. With each new discovery, the knot in my stomach tightened. These weren't just misunderstandings or family squabbles over money. This was a coordinated effort to access my inheritance without my informed consent. The people I should have been able to trust most were plotting behind my back, and I needed to protect myself. With evidence mounting of my family's intentions, I scheduled an emergency meeting with attorney Sarah Winters, a specialist in asset protection recommended by James. Her office, overlooking Boston Harbor, projected the competence and discretion I desperately needed. "Based on what you've shared, Mason, there's cause for immediate action," Sarah said after reviewing my documentation. "Family financial disputes can escalate quickly, especially when large sums are involved." She outlined several options, focusing on irrevocable trusts as the most secure protection mechanism. Once assets are placed in this type of trust, they cannot be removed or modified without strict adherence to the terms you establish now, she explained. "Not even by you, which is actually the point, if you can't access it freely. Neither can anyone pressuring you." The protection came with trade-offs. I would need to establish clear guidelines for distributions, select independent trustees, and accept that the arrangement would be largely permanent. It was a significant decision requiring immediate action. "Your family meeting is scheduled for Saturday," Sarah noted. "We'll need to work quickly to complete the transfers before then. I recommend we start the paperwork today." Over the next 3 days, we conducted a detailed inventory of all inherited assets. Investment accounts, real estate holdings, cash reserves, and personal property. Each item needed to be properly valued and classified for the trust documents. For the trustee selection, I recommend a corporate trustee as the primary, with a personal trustee as secondary, Sarah advised. Someone with no connection to your family, but who understands your values. I selected my mentor from my first financial firm, Martin, as the personal trustee. He had guided my early career with integrity and shared my grandfather's philosophy about wealth management. The distribution guidelines required careful consideration. I didn't want to lock the assets away completely. That wasn't the purpose of my grandfather's gift. After thoughtful discussion with Sarah, we established provisions for education funding, healthcare emergencies, and legitimate business investments, each requiring documented proof of purpose and trustee approval. What about family support? I asked, still struggling with cutting off my family entirely despite their behavior. Sarah helped craft a provision allowing limited family assistance, but only after completion of financial counseling and with clear documentation of need. It wasn't a blank check, but it provided a legitimate path for genuine emergencies. The technical process of establishing the trust was complex. Each account required separate paperwork for transfer, with specific language ensuring protection. Sarah's team worked around the clock, preparing documents for signature and coordinating with financial institutions. The tax implications are important to understand, Sarah cautioned, bringing in her firm's tax specialist. We structured the trust to minimize tax burden while maintaining protection, setting up appropriate reporting mechanisms for ongoing compliance. Security measures were essential. New passwords, authentication protocols, and monitoring systems were established for all accounts. Physical documents would be stored in secure locations with access logs. As the process unfolded, the emotional weight grew heavier. Sleepless nights became routine as I questioned whether I was overreacting. Memories from childhood played on repeat, Trevor and I building forts in the backyard. Family vacations to the lake, my mother nursing me through chicken pox, my father teaching me to ride a bike. During one particularly difficult evening, I called my close friend Michael, the only person besides James who knew the full situation. Am I being paranoid? I asked him. Is this whole trust thing an extreme reaction? Mason, you showed me the evidence. Michael replied firmly. They were literally planning to have you sign away your inheritance at a staged family intervention. That's not miscommunication, that's manipulation. Would your grandfather want you to hand over his life's work to the very people he specifically didn't leave it to? That question clarified things. My weekly therapy session also helped process the guilt and establish healthier boundaries. Family loyalty doesn't mean allowing yourself to be exploited, my therapist reminded me. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is establish clear boundaries. I maintained a detailed journal throughout the process, documenting both facts and feelings. If questions ever arose about my intentions, I wanted a contemporaneous record of my thought process and the evidence that led to my decisions. 3 days before the family meeting, I signed the final trust documents in Sarah's office. The irrevocable trust was officially established, with assets in the process of transfer. By Friday evening, the night before the meeting, Sarah confirmed that all transfers had been completed successfully. The trust is now active, Mason, she said during our final call. The assets are protected according to the terms we established. You'll receive confirmation from the corporate trustee on Monday. I secured copies of all documentation in my home safe, with additional copies in a safe deposit box and with Sarah's firm. The trust documents, transfer receipts, and my evidence folder were organized and ready if needed. That night, I prepared mentally for the confrontation ahead. Sarah had coached me on staying composed and not revealing information prematurely. Let them present their plan fully, she advised. Don't interrupt or get defensive. The more they reveal about their intentions, the clearer your position becomes. I practiced responses to various scenarios, from emotional manipulation to angry accusations. I reviewed meditation techniques to stay centered during high-stress moments. Most importantly, I established clear boundaries for myself about what information I would share and when. Before leaving for Connecticut the next morning, I had a final conversation with Sarah. Remember, you've done nothing wrong, she emphasized. You're protecting assets that were legally left to you, according to your grandfather's explicit wishes. Stay calm, stick to facts, and call me immediately if things escalate beyond verbal disagreement. Armed with preparation and protection, I drove to my childhood home, steeling myself for what would likely be the most difficult family encounter of my life. I arrived at my parents' colonial-style home in Connecticut at precisely 2 p.m. on Saturday. The house looked the same as always, meticulously maintained on the outside with my mother's carefully tended flower beds, hiding the emotional turbulence that often existed within. What wasn't normal was the number of cars in the driveway. Besides my parents' Mercedes and Trevor's recently acquired used Audi, where did that come from? I recognized my Aunt Linda's Volvo and another unfamiliar vehicle. This wasn't going to be the small family discussion they had described. My mother greeted me at the door with an embrace that lasted too long. "Mason, sweetheart! We've missed you so much!" Her perfume was overwhelming, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. My father stood behind her, offering a firm handshake and a pat on the back that felt rehearsed. "Good to see you, son. Thanks for making the trip." His eye contact wavered as he spoke. Something that only happened when he was hiding something. Trevor appeared from the living room, and I barely concealed my surprise at his appearance. Gone were the wrinkled t-shirts and jeans he typically wore. Instead, he was dressed in pressed slacks and a button-down shirt, his hair neatly styled. He looked like he was interviewing for a job, or appearing in court. "Hey, big bro," he said with a smile that seemed practiced. "Glad you could make it." The house had been thoroughly cleaned, with the dining room table set with my mother's best china, reserved for holidays and special occasions. The living room had been rearranged, with chairs positioned in a semicircle as if for a presentation. On the coffee table sat several family photo albums, conspicuously open to pictures of Trevor and me as children. In the kitchen, my mother had prepared an elaborate spread of finger foods and my father's expensive whiskey, the bottle he saved for very special occasions, stood open on the bar cart. Aunt Linda, my father's sister and longtime ally, greeted me with unusual warmth. "Mason, look at you! So grown up and successful." She had barely acknowledged me at the funeral, annoyed that her children had been left only small mementos in my grandfather's will. "We're just waiting for one more person," my mother mentioned casually. "Trevor's friend should be here any minute." Friend? This was supposed to be a family meeting. My suspicions deepened. The preliminary conversation was painfully forced. My father commented on the Patriots' prospects for the upcoming season, a topic he knew I had little interest in. My mother repeatedly reminisced about how close Trevor and I had been as children, describing shared experiences that had never happened. "Remember that summer you two built that treehouse together?" she asked warmly. We had never built a treehouse. Trevor had asked for one. My father started the project, abandoned it halfway through, and I had eventually dismantled the dangerous partial structure. Trevor kept checking his phone anxiously, his leg bouncing under the table, a telltale sign of his nervousness that I recognized from childhood. Every few minutes, he would glance at my father, who would give a small nod of reassurance. Aunt Linda tried to engage me about my work in Boston, but her questions were oddly focused on my schedule and whether I had to be back for anything important on Monday. The subtext was clear. They were hoping I could be pressured to stay and handle whatever they were planning. The doorbell rang, and Trevor jumped up to answer it. He returned with a young woman I'd never seen before, introduced as Melissa, my girlfriend. This was news to me. Last I'd heard, Trevor was still getting over a breakup from 6 months ago. Melissa gave me an overly familiar hug. "I've heard so much about you, Mason. Trevor talks about his big brother all the time." Trevor had called me exactly twice in the past year before the inheritance. Once everyone was settled with drinks and appetizers, my father cleared his throat in the way he always did before making important announcements. The room fell silent. "Mason, We've asked you here today because we love you, and because we're facing a family crisis that requires our united response. His tone was formal, rehearsed. Before we continue, I want to emphasize that everything we discuss today comes from a place of deep family commitment. My mother reached over to hold Trevor's hand, her eyes already glistening with tears on standby. Trevor took a deep breath and launched into what was clearly a practiced speech. Bro, this isn't easy for me to say, but I've hit rock bottom. His voice cracked on cue. The past few years, I've been struggling with some issues that got out of hand. I made some bad decisions, trusted the wrong people, and now I'm in serious trouble. Melissa placed her hand supportively on his shoulder as he continued. I owe money to some dangerous people. It started with a few sports bets, then casino loans when I tried to win it back. Now there are loan sharks involved, and they're not patient people. My father took over, switching to his business presentation voice. The total debt comes to approximately $450,000. Some of these creditors are threatening physical harm if payment isn't received soon. He stood and walked to a side table, returning with a folder containing spreadsheets and documents. We've developed a family financial restructuring plan that will resolve this situation and give Trevor the fresh start he needs. My mother jumped in, her voice gentle but insistent. Sweetie, we know your grandfather left you that money because he trusted you. And we're so proud of how responsible you've always been. The manipulation was transparent, but I maintained a neutral expression. The plan is simple, my father continued, spreading documents on the coffee table. We'll use a portion of your inheritance, just $500,000, to clear Trevor's debts completely. We've already drafted the necessary transfer paperwork to make this as easy as possible for you. I noticed the documents were already filled out, with a post-dated signature line waiting for me. They had prepared everything in advance, assuming my compliance. Trevor leaned forward, eyes earnest. I swear, Mason, this is the last time. I've learned my lesson. I'm getting help for the gambling, and Melissa here is keeping me accountable. I'll pay back every cent eventually. Aunt Linda, right on cue, added her piece. Mason, family has to come first. Your grandfather would want you to help your brother in his time of need. Blood is thicker than water. I remained silent, asking strategic questions to reveal the full extent of their plan. How exactly would the repayment work? I asked calmly. My father looked momentarily flustered. They clearly hadn't expected questions about repayment details. Well, Trevor would start once he's back on his feet, of course. Maybe small payments at first, gradually increasing as his situation improves. And what's the timeline for that? I pressed. More uncomfortable glances. That's hard to predict exactly. My mother interjected. The important thing is helping him now, when he needs it most. I asked about the interest rate on this family loan, whether there would be a formal agreement, and what consequences would exist for missed payments. Each question increased their discomfort. But I maintained a curious, non-confrontational tone. Their confidence in my compliance was remarkable. They genuinely believed I would sign over $500,000 with no guarantee of repayment, no formal agreement, and no consequences for default. The presumption was both insulting and illuminating. These are good questions, Mason, my father finally said with forced patience. We can work out those details after the immediate crisis is resolved. The important thing is transferring the funds by Monday to prevent any unfortunate incidents. I nodded thoughtfully, continuing to ask clarifying questions while observing their body language and inconsistencies. With each response, they revealed more about their true intentions and the extent of their planning. I simply let them talk, watching as they unwittingly exposed the full scope of their scheme. As the family meeting continued, more troubling details emerged. What had initially been presented as $450,000 in debt quickly expanded when I asked for a complete accounting. Well, there are a few additional obligations I forgot to mention initially, Trevor admitted, avoiding eye contact. Some personal loans from friends, another credit card or two. By the time he finished listing everything, the actual total was closer to $600,000. The dangerous creditors narrative also began to unravel as I asked specific questions about who these people were and how Trevor had connected with them. It's complicated, he hedged. Some guys from Atlantic City, people who know people. My father tried to redirect the conversation. The exact details aren't important right now. What matters is that these debts need to be paid quickly. Further questioning revealed the true extent of Trevor's gambling addiction. What they had characterized as a recent problem was actually a 5-year spiral that had consumed far more money than even they realized. Trevor had been traveling to casinos 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes losing $10,000 in a single night. But I've only gone twice this month, he offered weakly. As if this represented significant progress. My mother, seeing my hesitation, escalated her emotional appeals. Tears flowed freely now as she described her fears. If we don't help him, we could lose him forever, Mason. I can't sleep thinking about what these people might do to him. How would you feel if something happened and you could have prevented it? My father took a different approach, invoking family legacy and obligation. Your grandfather built his wealth to secure the future of this family, all of us. He wouldn't want to see Trevor destroyed when the means to help him are available. Trevor promised to create a detailed repayment plan, though it was clear from his vague answers that no such plan existed or would ever exist. I've got some really promising job leads, he insisted. And Melissa's uncle might bring me into his business. Melissa, on cue, nodded enthusiastically. He's really impressed with Trevor's ideas. Aunt Linda reminded me of the time Trevor stood up for you against those bullies in middle school. An event that never occurred. In reality, Trevor had often been the one to embarrass me in front of his friends. They passed around old family photos, pointing out moments of supposed brotherly bonding, many of which I barely remembered or remembered very differently than they were being described. The pressure intensified when my mother revealed they had already made promises to Trevor's creditors. We told them the money would be transferred by Monday, she admitted. They've agreed to stop the interest accumulation based on our word. You promised my money before even speaking to me? I asked, allowing a hint of surprise to enter my voice. We knew you'd want to help, my father said confidently. It was just a matter of explaining the situation properly. Trevor's girlfriend, who had been mostly silent, suddenly spoke up. You have no idea what he's been going through, she said with unexpected emotion. The anxiety, the fear. He needs his family now more than ever. I later learned she had only been dating Trevor for 3 weeks, hardly long enough to make such proclamations about his emotional state. The timeline they presented became increasingly urgent. What had started as, "We need to resolve this soon," shifted to, "The money must be transferred by Monday morning," and finally to, "We should complete the paperwork today before the banks close." I continued asking questions, watching their story evolve and contradict itself. I requested to see the threatening messages from these supposed dangerous creditors. Trevor claimed they only communicated by phone. I asked to see bank statements documenting the debts. My father said they were still compiling those records. Throughout it all, I maintained a composed, analytical approach, taking notes and requesting clarifications. This clearly wasn't what they had expected. The script they had prepared assumed I would either immediately agree out of family loyalty, or initially resist but quickly succumb to emotional manipulation. My continued questions and calm demeanor clearly frustrated them. 2 hours into the meeting, my father's tone shifted dramatically. Enough with the questions, Mason, he snapped. Patience evaporating. This isn't a business negotiation. This is family. Either you help your brother or you don't. It's that simple. My mother's tactics shifted from gentle tears to more overt emotional blackmail. If you turn your back on Trevor now, don't expect to be welcomed back into this family with open arms later. Some choices can't be undone. Trevor, sensing the change in atmosphere, dropped his reformed persona. Seriously, bro? You're sitting on millions while I could literally be killed over this. What kind of person does that make you? Aunt Linda suggested that perhaps I didn't deserve the inheritance if I wasn't willing to share it in a family emergency. Your grandfather would be so disappointed in your selfishness, she added, despite having barely known him. The most revealing moment came when my father pushed the transfer documents toward me with a pen. I noticed the papers included not just the $600,000 for Trevor's debts, but additional transfers totaling another $400,000 for family support and future emergency funds. What's this additional money for? I asked, pointing to the larger sum. My father looked uncomfortable. Just a buffer, in case we've underestimated some of the obligations. Better to handle everything at once rather than coming back to you again. As the conversation continued to deteriorate, Trevor made a critical slip. Frustrated by my resistance, he blurted out, I already spent some of it, okay? I told them the money was coming for sure. So they let me have an advance. You spent money you don't have, that I haven't agreed to give you? I clarified. Just like 10 grand. He mumbled. For a down payment on the Audi. I needed reliable transportation for job interviews. That explained the new car in the driveway, purchased with money he assumed would be coming from me. My father, trying to salvage the situation, inadvertently revealed even more. We've been planning this for months, Mason. Ever since the will reading. If you'd just been reasonable from the beginning about sharing the inheritance, we wouldn't need this formal meeting at all. My mother, increasingly desperate, abandoned all pretense. You've always been difficult about money, Mason. So rigid, so judgmental. Just like your grandfather. Neither of you ever understood that family means supporting each other, not counting every penny. The final confirmation came when I overheard my father whispering to Aunt Linda about their backup plan to contest the will if I refused to cooperate. They had already consulted an attorney about challenging the inheritance on grounds of undue influence, claiming my grandfather hadn't been of sound mind when making his final arrangements. With each revelation, the true extent of their entitlement and manipulation became clearer. This wasn't just about helping Trevor out of a crisis. It was about gaining control of my entire inheritance through whatever means necessary. With no intention of actual repayment or responsible management. As the facade crumbled completely, I maintained my composure, allowing them to fully expose their true intentions. The more they revealed in their frustration, the more certain I became that the protective measures I had taken were not only justified but absolutely necessary. After nearly 3 hours of escalating pressure and deteriorating pretenses, I finally broke my pattern of passive questioning. The room had become tense, with my father pacing, my mother dabbing at tears that appeared and disappeared with suspicious timing, and Trevor alternating between pleading and sullen anger. I think I've heard enough, I said calmly, straightening in my chair. All eyes turned to me, expectant. They clearly assumed my extended questioning had been leading to reluctant acceptance. Before I respond to your proposal, I want to share some information. I maintained a level tone. I'm aware this meeting was planned weeks ago. I know about the secret family gatherings where you discussed how to approach me. I've seen the loan applications with my forged signature. The color drained from my father's face. My mother froze mid-dab. Trevor's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. I have copies of Trevor's recent gambling receipts, over $30,000 just last month alone. I turned to Trevor. That's an interesting definition of only gone twice this month. You went through my things? Trevor sputtered, indignation replacing shock. I also have a recording of you telling your friend how you're coming into some serious cash soon because of a family situation getting resolved. I kept my voice steady, presenting facts rather than accusations. Aunt Linda shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Melissa looked at Trevor with new uncertainty. How dare you spy on this family? My mother began. But I gently raised my hand to continue. I've been forwarded emails discussing getting Mason to sign at this meeting. I have records of unauthorized inquiries into my financial accounts from this house's IP address. And I know about the consultation with an attorney regarding contesting Grandpa's will. My father attempted to regain control. Now listen here, Mason. Whatever you think you know, I know exactly what's happening. I interrupted firmly. This isn't about helping Trevor through a crisis. This is about gaining access to an inheritance that wasn't left to you, using emotional manipulation, threats, and potentially fraud to do it. The silence that followed was deafening. Into that silence, I delivered the news they hadn't anticipated. 3 days ago, I established an irrevocable trust for all assets inherited from grandfather. Every account, property, and investment has been transferred into that trust, with independent trustees and specific distribution guidelines. My father's face flushed with anger. You did what? The trust is legally established and active. The assets are no longer directly in my name or under my sole control. They cannot be accessed outside the specific terms established in the trust documents, which do not include paying off gambling debts or making large unsecured loans. You can't do that. My mother gasped. That's our family money. Actually, it wasn't. I corrected gently. It was grandfather's money, which he specifically left to me with clear intentions about its use. The trust simply ensures those intentions are honored. My father demanded to see documentation. Assuming I was bluffing, I retrieved a folder from my bag, presenting copies of the trust establishment documents and asset transfer confirmations. This is dated Wednesday, he noted, voice shaking with barely controlled rage. You did this deliberately before coming here. Yes, I acknowledged. I protected assets that were legally left to me, based on clear evidence of a coordinated plan to access them without my informed consent. Trevor exploded at this point, his facade of repentance completely evaporating. You selfish piece of shit. You've always thought you were better than me, always the perfect grandson, the responsible one. You set this whole thing up to make me look bad. He stormed toward me, finger pointing accusingly. You know what? Grandpa was a miserable old miser just like you. Both of you so smug with your financial wisdom, looking down on everyone else. His outburst revealed the truth more clearly than any evidence could have. This wasn't the desperate plea of someone in trouble seeking help. This was the entitlement of someone who believed he deserved money simply because he wanted it. So what happens to me now? Trevor demanded. You just let these guys break my legs while you sit on millions? I remained calm. The trust includes provisions for legitimate family emergencies, education, and health needs, with proper documentation and accountability. It does not include blank checks for gambling debts or luxury cars. That's your idea of help? He scoffed. Forms to fill out and begging for scraps? It's called responsibility, Trevor. Something grandfather tried to teach all of us. My father shifted to negotiation mode. Mason, surely we can work something out. Maybe restructure the trust, add some family members as co-trustees? The trust is irrevocable, I explained. That's the entire point. My mother collapsed into theatrical sobbing. If something happens to Trevor, it will be your fault. How will you live with yourself? You've destroyed this family. The manipulations that had worked throughout my childhood fell flat now. I had expected this reaction, had prepared for it, but the reality was still painful to witness. I brought something else, I said, opening a second folder. This contains copies of Trevor's gambling receipts, evidence of the credit card fraud, loan applications with forged signatures, and transcripts of Trevor discussing plans to access my inheritance. I placed it on the coffee table. I'm not going to use these unless necessary. But they exist, and copies are with my attorney. Trevor lunged for the folder, but Aunt Linda, surprisingly, held him back. She had been silently observing the unraveling of the plan, and something in her expression had changed. "Let me see those," she said quietly, reaching for the documents. As she paged through the evidence, her face grew increasingly troubled. "Richard," she said to my father, "did you know about these loan applications? With Mason's forged signature?" My father avoided her gaze. "It was just preparation. We never submitted them. And these casino receipts," she continued, turning to Trevor. 50,000 in one weekend? You told me this was about business investments gone wrong." The unified front began to fracture as the full truth emerged. Melissa edged away from Trevor, checking the time on her phone and murmuring something about another commitment. Trevor, seeing his support evaporating, kicked over the coffee table in rage, sending family photos and documents flying. The crystal bowl my grandmother had left to my mother shattered on the hardwood floor. "This is bullshit. All of it," he shouted. "You all act like I'm some kind of criminal, but none of you have any idea what it's like to be me. Always compared to perfect Mason. Always falling short." He stormed toward the door, pausing only to deliver a final threat. "When those guys come for me, I'll tell them where to find you next, brother. Hope your precious trust can protect you then." The door slammed behind him, leaving a stunned silence. My mother recovered first, her sorrow transforming instantly to righteous anger. "Are you satisfied now? If anything happens to him, his blood is on your hands. I hope your grandfather's money keeps you warm at night when you've got no family left." My father's approach was colder, more calculated. "This isn't over, Mason. There are legal options we haven't explored. Your grandfather wasn't in his right mind toward the end. Many people will testify to that. Establishing this trust could be seen as evidence you knew the will wouldn't stand up to scrutiny." The threats were empty, we both knew that, but they revealed how quickly family bonds could be discarded when money was involved. I gathered my things calmly, tucking the folders back into my bag. "I'm going to leave now. When everyone has calmed down, we can discuss how the trust can help in legitimate ways: education for Trevor, therapy, actual financial counseling. Those options remain available." To my surprise, Aunt Linda walked me to the door. "I didn't know the extent of it," she said quietly. "Richard only told me Trevor needed help with some bad investments. I had no idea about the gambling or the forgeries." "There's a lot they haven't told you," I replied. "But the trust has provisions for real emergencies and genuine needs. That door isn't closed." As I drove away from my childhood home, the weight of what had transpired settled heavily on my shoulders. I had protected my inheritance as my grandfather intended, but at the cost of exposing painful truths about my family. The relationships might never recover, but continuing the pattern of enablement would have only ensured more destruction in the long run. I called Sarah from the road to update her on the outcome, assuring her that no legal threats had materialized. Then I checked into a hotel rather than driving back to Boston immediately. I needed time to process, to grieve the family relationships that had been irreparably damaged, not by my actions, but by the truth those actions had revealed. The immediate aftermath of the family meeting was as chaotic as I had anticipated. My phone buzzed constantly with text messages and calls ranging from pleading to threatening. My mother cycled between tearful voicemails about losing her sons and scathing accusations about my character. My father's messages were briefer, alternating between legal threats and attempts at negotiation. Trevor disappeared for nearly 3 weeks. According to a reluctant update from Aunt Linda, he had initially stayed with a friend, then couch-surfed before eventually returning to my parents' house, having exhausted his welcome elsewhere. The extended family quickly divided into factions. Some cousins and aunts I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly reached out to express either support or condemnation, depending on which version of events they had heard. Family friends took sides, with long-time connections suddenly severed over second-hand accounts of what had transpired. Through it all, I maintained my silence publicly. I responded only to direct communications, keeping my answers factual and unemotional. Sarah had advised against engaging in the narrative battle, warning that anything I said would likely be twisted or used against me later. Let the trust speak for itself, she counseled. Actions over time will demonstrate your true intentions better than any defense you could offer now. The weeks following the confrontation were some of the most difficult of my life. Despite the overwhelming evidence justifying my actions, doubt and guilt crept in during quiet moments. Had I overreacted? Could there have been a less dramatic solution? Was I becoming the cold, money-obsessed person they accused me of being? My weekly therapy sessions became essential to processing these questions. Dr. Harris helped me distinguish between healthy guilt and the programmed guilt response from years of family conditioning. What you're experiencing is the discomfort of changing unhealthy patterns, she explained during one particularly difficult session. You've disrupted a family system that operated on enabling and financial codependence. That system will fight to reestablish itself, and your guilt is part of that process. We discussed the difference between generosity and enablement, between boundaries and walls. Protecting assets isn't the same as hoarding them, she reminded me. Your grandfather understood that distinction, which is why he structured his will as he did. I found myself reviewing my childhood memories, recognizing patterns I had normalized. The constant bailouts for Trevor, the financial strain his needs placed on our family. My parents' reluctance to require accountability. These weren't new behaviors brought on by the inheritance situation. They were established dynamics that the inheritance had merely intensified. My journal became a crucial tool for processing this realization. Writing helped me clarify my thoughts and track my emotional progress. Today I remembered how Trevor crashed his second car in high school. I wrote one evening. Dad took money from my college fund to buy him another one, promising to replace it later. He never did. I worked extra hours at the library to make up the difference. This pattern has always existed. I just didn't have the language to name it. About a month after the confrontation, I received an unexpected message from Aunt Linda asking to meet for coffee. Curious and cautious, I agreed to see her at a cafe halfway between our locations. She looked tired when she arrived, the strain of family conflict evident in the new lines around her eyes. I owe you an apology, she said after we'd settled with our drinks. I believed what Richard and Diane told me without question, and I participated in pressuring you unfairly. Her frankness surprised me. What changed your mind? I asked. After you left. Things fell apart quickly. Trevor's outbursts revealed more than your evidence did, honestly. And then I started asking questions Richard couldn't answer comfortably. She sighed, stirring her coffee absently. I've been enabling bad behavior too, I realize now. It was easier than confronting the truth. Linda shared family history I hadn't known, how my father had similar financial issues in his youth, with my grandparents repeatedly bailing him out until my grandfather finally refused. That refusal had created the rift between them that never fully healed. Your father resented your grandfather's stinginess, as he called it. He never understood it was actually a form of tough love. She looked at me with new understanding. You remind him of your grandfather, and I don't think he can forgive either of you for being right. Linda offered to help mediate a healthier relationship moving forward. They won't listen to you right now, but they might listen to me, especially if I approach it gradually. Her offer was the first glimmer of potential healing, though I kept my expectations realistic. I appreciate that, Linda. But I want to be clear. The trust protections will remain in place. Any reconciliation has to happen with that understanding. She nodded. I think that's wise, actually. We've all seen what happens without those boundaries. With my emotional health stabilizing, I turned my attention to developing a constructive alternative to the blank check my family had expected. Working with the trust attorneys, I created a structured support plan that could genuinely help Trevor if he chose to accept it. The plan included funding for a reputable addiction treatment program specializing in gambling disorders. It offered to cover therapy sessions and financial literacy courses. For legitimate debts, those that could be documented and verified, the trust would consider a matching program where Trevor would pay half and the trust would pay half, creating both assistance and accountability. Most importantly, the plan required professional oversight. Any financial support would be managed by financial counselors who would work directly with creditors rather than giving cash to Trevor. Progress reports and continued participation in recovery programs would be required for ongoing support. I presented this plan to Aunt Linda first, who recognized its value immediately. "This is actual help, not just enabling," she agreed. "The question is whether they're ready to see it that way." The initial response was predictably negative. My mother dismissed it as controlling, and my father called it insulting. Trevor didn't respond at all, having apparently told my parents he wanted nothing to do with any plan I created. But reality has a way of asserting itself. 2 months after our confrontation, Trevor reached a crisis point. He was arrested for trying to cash a bad check, and the full extent of his gambling debts became impossible to hide. With legal troubles mounting and no financial safety net, he reluctantly agreed to consider the treatment program. Our first meeting with the addiction counselor was tense and awkward. Trevor avoided eye contact, speaking only when directly addressed. The counselor, experienced with reluctant clients, gently guided the conversation toward practical next steps rather than dwelling on past conflicts. "Recovery isn't about assigning blame," she told us. "It's about creating a sustainable path forward. Both of you will need to adjust your expectations and communication styles." Trevor entered a 30-day inpatient program the following week. I arranged for the trust to cover the costs directly, with the understanding that completion of the program was a prerequisite for any additional financial support. My parents remained distant, though Linda reported they were watching Trevor's progress closely. Their financial situation had deteriorated as the full scope of what they had given Trevor over the years came to light. The second mortgage on their house, multiple maxed-out credit cards, and depleted retirement accounts painted a grim picture. 6 months after the confrontation, we held our first family meeting with a professional mediator. The conversation was strained but productive. Trevor, 90 days sober and actively participating in Gamblers Anonymous, spoke with a clarity I hadn't heard from him in years. "I was angry at Mason for cutting me off," he admitted. "But the program has helped me see that continuous bailouts were keeping me sick. I needed consequences to hit bottom and decide to change." My parents struggled more with accepting their role in the situation. My mother still occasionally slipped into defending Trevor's past behavior, or minimizing the severity of his addiction. My father fluctuated between grudging acknowledgement of the trust's benefits and resentment of the control it represented. Progress came in small increments. Trevor completed the financial literacy program and began working with a debt counselor to create a repayment plan for his legitimate debts. The trust matched his payments as promised, with funds going directly to creditors. He secured a job at a friend's landscaping company, modest work compared to his previous positions, but stable and structured. My relationship with my parents slowly shifted from estrangement to cautious, limited contact. Holiday gatherings remained tense affairs, but increasingly less volatile as new boundaries were established and respected. Throughout this period of family reconstruction, I found myself reflecting deeply on my grandfather's wisdom. His decision to leave the inheritance primarily to me wasn't about favoritism, as my family had claimed. It was a clear-eyed assessment of who would steward those resources responsibly. Not just for personal benefit, but for the benefit of the family as a whole. The trust now funds educational opportunities for extended family members, with several cousins receiving college scholarship support. It has covered medical expenses for an aunt battling cancer and provided seed funding for a cousin's ethically run small business. The requirement for financial education before receiving support has gradually transformed our family's approach to money management. 1 year after the confrontation, I established a financial education nonprofit, using a portion of the trust's earnings to provide workshops and resources for families struggling with financial literacy. The curriculum incorporates many of my grandfather's principles, translated into accessible, practical guidance for modern financial challenges. Trevor's progress has been the most remarkable transformation. 18 months sober, he now helps facilitate support groups for other gambling addicts. Our relationship will never return to some idealized brotherly bond. Too much has happened for that, but we've developed a respectful, honest connection based on who we are now rather than who our parents wanted us to be. My parents have adjusted to the new reality with varying degrees of acceptance. My mother still occasionally makes comments about the inheritance, but they lack the manipulative power they once held. My father, facing retirement with diminished savings, has reluctantly begun working with a financial advisor recommended by the trust. The most profound lesson from this experience has been understanding the true meaning of inheritance. What my grandfather left me wasn't just money and assets, it was a philosophy about the responsible stewardship of resources. It was the courage to establish boundaries, even when painful. It was the wisdom to distinguish between generosity and enablement. By protecting the inheritance, I preserve not just the financial legacy but the values behind it. The trust hasn't prevented me from helping my family. It's enabled me to help them in ways that promote growth rather than dependence. That distinction makes all the difference. As I close this chapter of my story, I'm reminded of something my grandfather told me during one of our last conversations. Money magnifies who we already are, Mason. It doesn't change our character, it reveals it. The inheritance crisis exposed difficult truths about my family, but it also revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed. I'm curious about your experiences with family financial conflicts. Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries with loved ones? How did you balance compassion with self-protection? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more reflections on navigating complex family dynamics. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the most loving thing we can do for others is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices.